We are now recording, by the way, just to let you know, those of you. So welcome to the 10th Paparelli Zoom chat. I appreciate you all coming back after having taken a week off. You know, I was at that motorcycle racetrack school, which was really great. I learned a ton, and it's always good to go fast. When you're going fast, you forget about everything else that's going on. But today is, just to let you know, is the 79th day since the shutdown, federal shutdown order was put in place for America. So we're 30 days now into this sort of slow go opening of Georgia. And I say slow go because I still look at Paces Ferry and I look at the traffic, and there's still no traffic at 8 a.m. on Paces Ferry, which is usually backed up. We've been operating in this isolation and work from home economy, just to let you know, for 60% of this year. 40 million people are unemployed, which is a number that just astounds me. And our nation now is in this civil unrest as racial and economic class differences are starting to be exposed, you know, which has been terribly upsetting for me, you know, seeing all this go on. In the midst of all this, you know, there's this little ray of hope that sort of came and went, and that was Elon Musk. You know, he built two companies from scratch, one of which is threatening the automobile industry, which is incredible. And the other, he just created a whole new industry called space travel. You know, Stephen Fleming talked about that for years. He used to run the ATDC. But so we got this new industry called space travel. And Musk, I look at this guy and I read his biography and I was just really amazed at him. I'm not saying I'm a great fan, but I'm really amazed at the guy because I think he shows us as men and women created by God what we're capable of achieving, which is absolutely incredible. But in the meantime, back on Earth, you know, I still see some of our businesses are failing. You know, some are thriving, and most of us are just basically struggling. You know, I see a lot of local businesses that way. So, but all of our businesses are affected in one way or another. Today, I wanted to talk about one of those effects that sort of came to mind that we're all going to have to be faced with or deal with as CEOs. And it is one we thought we actually had nailed. You know, it is our strength and our differentiator in our business. It's something we practice every day, and that's our culture in our business. You know, but this COVID thing just sort of nuked it, you know. So what do we do now? That's the question. The Paparelli Zoom chat is an interactive forum for entrepreneurs to discuss their issues and opportunities. You know, I always say being a leader is a pretty lonely job. You know, we use this forum to listen, learn, and to share. So let's help each other because we're stronger together. There is a resource tab on the paparelli.com site. Anything you think would be valuable that you found valuable that you'd like to share, if you send it to me, I'll post it to the site. The house rules should be posted shortly into the chat. And I don't know, is John Marshall on this call? If he is, I ask him to give me a little bit of help.
Hey, I'm here.
Okay, great. John, if you give me a little bit of help and do what you did the last few times, which is monitor that chat and step in where you think it's appropriate.
Happy to, thank you.
Thanks. So our topic today, your culture just got nuked, now what? I always give you the word from Jesus. The word of the day today from Christ himself is, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. And my translation for this and why I chose this verse is because I believe that we build great companies when we build our companies on this solid rock of a healthy culture. Now, most of us have a centralized workforce. We built the culture in this sort of face-to-face environment. And now we're challenged with this prospect that I'm hearing from many people of more and more of our workforce, presumably maybe even a majority, is going to start working from home. So if people start working from home in our company, how do we retain this all important culture, with all these people not in the office? Okay. And to help with kick off this discussion, I invited two really successful entrepreneurs. One is Rob Foreman, who many of you I know, and the other is Chris Cornell, which many of you know, many of you don't, but you need to know. And they're going to share their experience on their cultures today and the challenge that they're faced with. For those of you who don't know Rob is the president of Sales Loft. He's also the co-founder of Sales Loft with my friend Kyle Porter. Kyle was the promoter and the salesman, and Rob was the product builder and the strategist. They made a great team together, and they've grown this Sales Loft to really stratospheric growth. Kyle and Rob also built a very strong, centralized culture at Sales Loft. When I visited the company, I remember I felt it instantly, which is when you see a good culture, it just washes over you when you walk in the door. And it was a culture of youth and speed and optimism and unlimited potential. That's how I would sum up my visit. So Rob, thanks for joining us today. I know you're on vacation, and I appreciate you taking the time to invest in our community.
My
So
pleasure.
thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, great. So can you first, maybe I can kind of kick this off by just tell us what the Sales Loft culture that you and Kyle put in place, what is it?
Well, that's a good question. That's where we typically start, because when we have talked about our culture facing adversity, or our culture changing, or our culture, having to adapt in a remote and distributed workforce, the first question that I come back to is, well, how do we define culture? And because the definition of it plays an important role in how we're going to solve for it. And so what we landed on years ago was that culture is the feeling of the environment when our values are consistently applied.
Oh,
And
so
you'll
that's-
notice that
So what I said, that's consistent with what I said.
right. And
Yeah.
so that you feel it from those values. I'll say the opposite is also true. If you walk into a place and it feels kind of down and negative, it's like the values are being applied, whether you know it or not. And so the question is, what are our values? And so that's what we go back to. Like, culture is all about values. And so it's from the beginning at Sales Loft, we sat down and we pulled out a piece of paper when it was 3 of us in January of 2013. And we said, what are our values? And we started listing them out, and they changed a little bit over time. And we have 5 of them. But I think having something and making them authentic was the key. I don't know if the specific value is what matters, but rather having authentic values, because people can smell out hypocrisy. If we say we value one thing and then we do something else, they know that that's actually the value.
Right.
And so I think that's what has helped us.
You sat down and you said it was important for you to sit down and decide, well, what are our values?
Yeah.
How is it important? How was it the values important in building Sales Loft into the success that you've made it?
I think it's we got fortunate. We're lucky. Right before starting Sales Loft, I had started a company called Higher IQ, and I had largely failed in this regard. And I remember going to the office day after day, and it just felt bad. Like I didn't like going to work at a company that I created, and I could I could blame my boss. I'd be like, that guy doesn't know what he's doing, and I was like, that guy in the mirror doesn't know what he's doing. And so, but it became very personal. I think it was a high degree of pain right before Kyle and I joined together. And what I mean is, my wife started keeping track. I'd come home from work and she was like, good day or bad day? And I was like, and after a couple months, she pulls out a calendar and she'd put a happy face or a sad face. And she pulled out a calendar, and there were 3 months, and I don't think there was one happy face. And so, and she said, and I don't know how she gets away with this, but she was basically like, you're a better husband than this. You're a better man than this. Like, you have to make a change. Like, you can't just go in day after day. And it's what the way the environment that we exist in at work influences our household. It influences our marriages, influences how we parent. Like, it's the cycle that feeds. And if we have a positive environment at work, we can bring it home. And if we have a positive environment at home, we can bring it back to work. But the same is true. If we're negative at work, we can bring it home and it can spiral. And I was not the man I wanted to be. I was not the dad I wanted to be. I had 2 kids at the time. I was in the process of adopting 2 more. And I was like, I've got to make a change. So I set out to learn about culture. I didn't know the term organizational health, and I didn't know the importance of values, but I knew what it was like when it was wrong. And that was smothering. I was like, I should just go back to working for a big company.
What I did, but I said that, I made the comment that culture is really the foundation. See, I see it as sort of a secret sauce.
Yeah.
That people can copy your product.
Yep.
People can copy your marketing methods, but they can't copy a culture.
I would agree.
I had this Salesforce culture when I was looking at SalesLoft culture. When I was looking at SalesLoft, you walk in, you had the masseuse, you had people who would cook for the employees, you had employee lunches, you had all this kind of stuff going on. You were on a hoverboard when I was there the last time and all.
I do like to ride things with wheels. So
right, man, that's cool. So
exactly.
but I don't understand what so
that's where I would clarify. That's not culture. That's perks. Like
those are perks. Okay.
Those are fun, and those are things that we do, and those can be they can be an outworking of our personality as a business and the kind of the youthfulness and the speed for sure. It's not our culture. So I've been I think, where did it come from? I experienced a high degree of misalignment between kind of who we were and how we worked. I was working with other good professionals, but we didn't value the same thing. Kyle went through the exact same thing. He calls it SalesLoft 1.0. He did it for a year and he failed. So here you have 2 guys who failed, and they came together and we said, look, it doesn't matter what we build. We could sell cheese. We want to be on the same page on how we do it. It reminds me of, like, character is how we act when nobody's around. I think culture is how people act when the leaders aren't around, or how the leaders act when no one's looking. And so that type of, we said, we want to get that right. If we get that right, then we think good things will happen. At the time, I mean, if you remember, this is 2013. We were not the hot startup. David Cummings had just sold Pardot. He started Kevy. Kevy was a hot thing. And, like, we're just 3 guys working in a room. And so the culture did not accelerate our growth. Finding a big market with product market fit accelerated our growth. Right. Culture helped us keep the wheels on, helped us keep us aligned. It made it more fun. It helped keep our retention higher because people
that's a good
included
point.
in the process.
So I like that. I like it. So I agree with you. Yeah. Unless you have people buying your product, you hit a hot market.
Yeah.
You ain't going to have growth.
I think you can have a fantastic culture in a 10-person company. Absolutely. And it doesn't mean hyper growth.
So, but now here you are. So you say it kept the wheels on, and you were by and large a centralized organization.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I saw when I walked in. Now what happened is going forward, you got some high percentage of your employees who will now work from home. Like Zuckerberg said, at least 50% of our workforce now will work from home full time. Now, I don't know so what percentage of your workforce do you project being work from home people full time? And then, just because that creates a new problem from centralized to decentralized. So
it does. And this is the part where I would say I think in some ways we got lucky because the transition has gone better than we expected because of the foundation, the firmness of the foundation. And I'll unpack that a little bit. But in other ways, we have missed the mark because after we were tracking the numbers with COVID and we decided to close all of the offices, we have 5 offices, but 80% of our workforce is in Atlanta. And so we closed the offices. So everyone is distributed now. And we would look at it on basically a 30 or 45-day horizon. And we'd say, we'll reevaluate at this date, and we'll reevaluate at this date, and we'll reevaluate at this date. And to your point, the thing that bothers me is here I am at June 3rd, and we have not been as intentional as we have historically been in the past about how we live out our values. Yeah. And so that's a change that we're in the midst of right now. And so we have this program called Coffee with the Lofty. It's this Slack bot that when you join every week, it pairs you with somebody randomly in the company. And so for some reason, I get paired with new people all the time. And so I've been having coffee with new people. Even people who have started since we closed the office. Wow. And so the interesting thing has been that they talk about, I asked them what brought them to SalesLoft and what are they excited about and what do they want to grow in? But they inevitably always talk about how they love the culture. They saw Glassdoor, they thought we paid people to fake it. But then they come in and they're like, the culture is real. And I pause and I say, but you haven't even been into the office. And they look at me like I've got a third head. They're like, culture is not an office. Culture is how I feel people are genuinely interested in me, that they want to support my success. Culture is transparency in the leadership team, feeling like they are for us and not just indifferent towards us. Culture is, it goes back to what they hadn't articulated.
What you're saying there is a little bit different than the way, I mean, I've been to a meeting where Kyle stood up in front of like the new employee group. I think you guys used to do that once every 2 weeks or once a month or whatever.
We do it once a month now. Yep.
Yeah. But that was face to face. All new employees get together, and Kyle gives his whole bit, about what this history of Sales Loft, his personal testimony. He goes through this whole thing, and what you stand for. But now what you just said is, you said that you're saying that we want to make sure that people get the culture, okay? And now I think what's happening is, in a distributed environment, it's almost like the employees now are contributing to the definition of the culture more than sort of a top down. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Because if I'm not in the office, right?
Culture is always, so in one of the talks I give, and we still do it now, we just do it over Zoom and we look at faces like this, and it's different for sure, but the message is the same. What I would say in one of my talks is that, and it's ironic now that it works this way, I said, culture is like herd immunity. If all of us care about our values and applying the values in our specific department, then if there is somebody who's out of alignment, like that will work itself out. They will be out of the company eventually, or they will get with the program, or it will work itself out. That's herd immunity. When enough people leave or enough people aren't part of the herd community, eventually it will hit a tipping point and bad culture will rip through the organization, because they'll look around and they'll say, like, how did this happen? Where did this come from? So in the way I end the talk is I say, if you love working at Sales Loft, then I want your commitment that you are going to invest in and contribute to the culture. And you have to, because I can't do it, Kyle can't do it.
Let's go back
So,
to
let me finish. So, but what I say is that it is, everybody has to be involved in it, but it is led by us as the founders. So we don't make the culture, we lead the culture. So the big things we do is we set how we hire, we set what we reward publicly, and we set who we fire. And if we do that, then everybody kind of knows, kind of like character. They know how to behave when leaders aren't around. They know what, if they go out on a limb and they tell a teammate, hey, that's not how we do things here, they know that they will be protected, because that is living out our values, calling out somebody for.
But I understand that, but you made the comment, you used the term herd, right?
Yeah.
Herd.
Herd
Okay.
immunity, yes.
So when I think of a herd, you think about, these sort of bison, on Ted Turner's ranch, right? They're all together running around, right? But what happens when you wind up with a disparate herd, right? Now I've got bison individuals kind of floating around the range here, okay? Yeah, they're all part of the herd sometimes, but they're not part of the herd often. So, so what challenge does that bring as you look to this sort of more decentralized organization with regard to your culture?
Yeah, so that's the part we haven't, we haven't fully cracked. What I do know though is, so we have a bi-weekly all hands where we get the company together, and we've gotten employee feedback. One of the favorite sections is at the end of every all hands, the last 15 minutes is just Q&A with me and Kyle, Q&A with another executive. Like,
this is on a video call kind of
it's usually on stage, but we've just transferred that to a video call. But now we do it on a video call.
Okay.
So now we do the whole company. And during the midst of all of this change, I remember in the early, it was probably 2014 or 15, we were beginning to get a lot of traction and growing. And we said, man, these calls, they take a lot of work to prepare. Maybe instead of, we did them as monthly breakfasts in the beginning. We said, maybe instead of monthly breakfast, we should do it once a quarter and just do a better production. And a mentor coached us. He said, you're wrong. I know it seems right, but you actually need to communicate more often. And so for 3 years, we did weekly all hands with the whole company. And that synchronization is helpful. So even though everyone is at home, we're still coming into the video. I think what is hard, which has not been cracked, is how do you bump into people that you don't normally bump into? I would normally go to the kitchen, and I'm drinking tea here. So it's like go to the kitchen and see
Which
somebody.
is reinforcing for the herd, right?
It is reinforcing that they positive interactions. And so I think there's more that we can do there to, but we do things like we started it with our executive team, and then we've now seen other teams start to do it. We do like a virtual happy hour on Friday afternoon. And it seemed like the lamest thing when somebody put it on my calendar. It was not my idea. I wish it actually works really well. But we get on there, and it's the one meeting, because I drive at home in the business.
Yeah.
We do not meet unless we know why we're meeting, why everyone is here, and what we're trying to accomplish. And so
That's my Rob Foreman. I know.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
So, but this meeting, we get on and there's no agenda, and we hang out, and we literally, if people drink, they go grab a beer, and I'm sitting on my porch, and we catch up, because some of that personal interaction matters. And so figuring some of that out. The other piece that had helped us that we incorporated into our operational meetings that has translated is that we open up every weekly tactical meeting. So on our leadership team or department meetings, kind of all the way through the company, we open up with personal and professional highlight. It takes about 10 minutes. You go around, personal and professional highlight.
Okay.
And I forget who told us about this, but it is this small little tweak where when I hear about Charlie's highlight from the weekend where he went out with his grandkids or he did this thing, it reminds me that he's a human and that I'm a human and that we all are connected. And so even though we are more distant than ever, we have the ability to connect because we're all going through the same thing. And we can share about that. One of our happy hours, we shared, the theme was, what do you miss? Another one was, what's the first thing you'll do, when all this is over? And so, experiencing that humanity helps with.
So tell me this, though, that the kickoff really as a new employee to learning what the culture was about was that meeting with Kyle and you, okay, where you welcome the employees. Okay. How do you do that now as you're hiring new employees?
Yeah. So we changed that 6 or 9 months ago anyway, because there were so many people we're hiring that we recorded videos of these stories. So we etched them in a little bit. And so the new hires, there's like a 3-day corporate new hire, and then you transition to your department new hire plan for the remaining 2 weeks. And so thankfully our chief people officer, Christine Kashubsky, had already been putting the building blocks in place for a consistent onboarding. So we hire, we onboard, it's all of those building blocks. I think that's the secret weapon of applying your values. I remember somebody said, you don't build culture, you hire it. And so if we hire it and then we onboard it, so we set the expectation and then we reprimand on the other end of it and remove anyone who is not a good fit, then.
Do you think that in all of this, with this big change, and you didn't answer my question, what percentage of your, so I could set a stake in the ground here and people can understand.
You remember that I had skipped that.
Yeah. So what percentage, what are you forecasting? I mean, you can give me a range of what percentage of people will be working from home going forward.
So I'll tell you what, and we literally, and I think this is part of what has helped, is that Kyle and I had this conversation on all hands last Thursday. And we basically said, we don't know, but we are considering, rather than extend a month, we are considering making a bigger move. And we're like, this is not a signal that we're trying to drip you the decision and get you warmed up to it, grandma's on the roof kind of thing. This is us having an open dialogue. We wonder if that we'll move to an optional office, because at least for the remainder of 2020, because it is very difficult to say you have to be back in the office. Because I meet with some of these people. I asked the employee, I said, what would you do if I said you had to be back in the office? And she looked at me in kind of, deer in the headlights and said, I mean, well, what do I do with my kids? Like, the camps are closed, the schools aren't open, like daycare is like spotty. And if we're open for 2 weeks and closed for another week, like, so we tell, okay, everyone who doesn't have children has to be in the office. Oh, lost me. And so it leads to this kind of weird, like, it's hard to apply consistently. And so it may become optional. So then we said, well,
I'll tell you this. I did have somebody that I talked to who has about 100 employees, and he did it sort of an A-B, right?
Yep.
So A comes in one time for 2 days and B, and just to try it out, this was 2 weeks ago. So that was like 100 years ago in this environment that we're
exactly.
in. Okay. So he said, he said, okay, he invited 43 employees back in and made it optional.
Mm-hmm.
7 people showed up. Okay. 3 of which were partners, 1 of which was 70 years old. Okay. And he said, so now we're seeing that, and so, and here I am talking to a new employee and said, look, I'd really like you to come in. And the guy said, I just don't feel comfortable with that. And he's talking to the partner of the firm,
Right.
So it's just to give you a little bit of feedback in that.
Yeah. It is logistically difficult.
So let me ask you the last question I have for you.
Sure.
Okay. And I got to get to Chris here.
I know. Save the best for last.
Yeah, that's best.
I love Chris.
Chris has a little bit more experience in this culture stuff and distributed workforce, but I'll get to Chris. But my question is as you look forward with you and Kyle look forward, do you think that this is going to create a different culture? Okay, for Sales Loft, as you look out a year from now.
Yeah,
What will
I
that-
think. So if we define our culture by our values, then part of my answer is to say no, because that's who we are. And that's, if we continue to apply it, then we should get a similar feel. What I will say is the manifestations or the human systems that we have in place will absolutely evolve. The way that we connect and do happy hour, we're still trying to figure out how do you do that? How do you bump into people? So we do this coffee with the lofty, but I believe that the way that people experience the company will evolve. What I'm also pushing the company and challenging the company on is, how can we look at this as an advantage? We would have never made this change. And so we're looking to hire a chief product officer. And because of the majority of the executive team being in Atlanta, we were not looking outside of Atlanta. And we had interviewed tons and tons of people. And so now, if we're going to be distributed and we're going to be for a while, that is a strength that we can broaden our base, get access to different talent. And so the question I ask our leadership team and the company is, how could we think about this as an advantage? And as it changes, we go, this change is hard because change creates loss and anxiety. But how can we frame it as potentially good change? And what are we getting out of it? We are losing something. I miss just pacing the halls. I miss riding my hoverboard around. But I don't miss the commute. And I really love that those hours are put back into my family's pocket and I'm spending them a different way. And so there are a lot of positives.
That's going to change the culture for sure. I like what you're saying too, is that I have a friend who works for Twitter, and he made up in New York, and he made the comment, he said, Dorsey made an announcement that's about, I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks ago. And he said, look, we're not going to be hiring locally anymore. We're looking for the best people. I don't care where they are. Okay. And that was a big change. And you're going to be doing that same change, even for the C-level executives, you're talking about, which is pretty, and that will in and of itself create new culture, new change. But like you said, it's anxiety, but it's also a great opportunity. Rob, this has been really, really helpful. Thanks for coming off your vacation for this. And I hope you stick around for the next few minutes here, because now we're going to hear from Chris.
I know, I love Chris.
I told Chris, I invited what I call Mr. Culture to our call, okay? Chris Cornell is the founder and CEO of Boostrathon. When I think of corporate culture, I really do think of Chris. I even wrote a couple of articles on Chris and his company because I was so impressed. And I've not been a really hard culture guy, but whenever I'm around him, I can't help but write about it. 18 years ago, Chris and his wife traveled from elementary school to elementary school, from state to state, designing fundraisers for these elementary schools. And his team aims to bring together communities, raise money, and promote involvement. They're the most successful organization today in that business by far. Chris is hyper-focused on culture and the importance of culture in building a fast growth, profitable, and what I'll call a social impact enterprise. Their headquarters, if you go visit their headquarters, when I was there, I talked about visiting Rob. The headquarters for Chris is their sort of culture central, with Chris and the hub there, if you will. But most of his employees do operate remotely. So he's been dealing with this for a while. And I say their culture is nothing short of a group of cheerleaders, at the national championship game. if you ever go there. They're just rabid. And starts with Chris. So Chris, I see you're on the call. You there for me?
I'm here, Charlie. Thanks for your time.
Oh man, I just called you a couple of days ago and boom, you took this. And I really, really appreciate you doing this on such notice. But, without getting you too off into the weeds on your culture, how does I just sort of established that you have a very, very strong culture. How has that contributed to your success?
Yeah, well, greetings. I see a few familiar faces on here. And listen, Rob, you could have taken the whole time. Rob, you're brilliant. Really respect you. I appreciate your friendship. And Charlie, thank you for your mentorship. And just we cross paths, I don't know, every 6 months. And you're a mentor to many. You're an icon. So
thank you.
Thanks. It's the craziest. I'm only 40. I know some of you are older, some of you are younger, but it's the craziest professional moments of my life, and just what a season we're living in. I just feel compelled to say, I can't see every face out there, but we're all under pressure, as entrepreneurs. I want to just encourage you to be strong and courageous. I feel like I literally have a wristband that has be strong and courageous on one wrist, and then our company's virtues, which I'll talk about a little bit, on the other wrist. And I look at them every 15 minutes.
How often do you sort of print a new wristband?
These are a couple years old right now, but as needed. I also feel compelled just to, if any friends of color out there, what you're going through, for me as a white male in majority culture, just don't fully understand your world, but my thoughts and prayers are with you. I had a 5 a.m. workout this morning, and then a few of us met at our church for a weekly prayer walk, and that was our primary prayer today for about an hour and a half. It's just what the Black community especially has been feeling for hundreds of years, but is amplified in this season. And then friends of mine in the white community are just now getting a glimpse of and starting to listen and learn. And my thoughts and prayers, and I feel like this is a season as entrepreneurial leaders that we can pray and think about how can we be strong and courageous for the Black community specifically. How do they need us in this season and the season beyond? So just felt compelled to say that in this moment to a bunch of leaders.
I think what's interesting is I have, and I don't want to go off on this too far, but I'm glad that you brought it up, is I have talked to some other people, and it seems like, I love what my son said, there's nothing that any white person can post that's not going to sound stupid, okay? And I've seen that. But one of the things that I think that this has done is it's opened up a dialogue that we're absolutely, it's almost okay for our Black brothers here, to really open up and speak to us. And now we're listening, if you will. It's starting a dialogue that we hadn't had before because they didn't feel it was okay to talk about it. So this has been, it's been very valuable. But you talk about asking people to be strong and courageous during this sort of work from home, COVID, isolation, this transition that we're going through. What does that mean to me when you say, okay, I'm a CEO, I should be strong and courageous to this time?
Well, I'll give a 30-second orientation. We primarily host fitness fun runs on elementary schools, 4,500 schools across the country. My wife and I started the company in my college dorm room, and then we got married the next summer. We traveled around the country and then moved to Atlanta 15 years ago. And we were expecting revenue to be 90 million this year, our best year yet, by far, profitable. We've never had a year we haven't grown 30% a year. We have no debt. And then on March the 13th, the unthinkable worst case scenario we could not imagine happened, and every elementary school in the country shut down. So revenue went to zero, and it's been there since March the 13th. Thank goodness I'm balanced with a very conservative CFO that's annoyed me for the past decade, but we will survive it. But for the first time in our history, we won't grow, double digits big time per year. And, and we're fighting for our lives. But when you combine schools and events, the two hardest hit areas. So you use the word successful a few times. It's that 3 months ago, that might've been completely true. I've said so many times, I'm sure you have as well, entrepreneurs, that it could all be gone tomorrow. What do you mean? Well, here we go. It could be. So, I'm more grateful than ever before. I feel like this is still just the beginning of our organization, but there's a non-zero chance that we won't exist. And there always has been, but it's even more amplified in that moment. So it makes me grateful
It
for
always has been, but there was no way that you could forecast it, right?
That's right.
Sort of like you're in the place of the airlines, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're ready for these millions of customers a day, and all of a sudden I'm getting this drip.
Yeah, I wish I had a drip right now.
I've got planes all over the
I had
place.
25% capacity. I have
Yeah,
zero.
right, exactly. So here you are, you're this sort of very upbeat, sort of cheerleader type environment, right?
Yep.
And now you find yourself with an absence of market,
Right.
not growing 30% a year, wondering how you're going to hold on. How do you carry that into this environment?
Yeah. Well,
because you just can't say, keep a stiff upper lip, everybody. It's going to be just great. We're a terrific team,
To what Rob said, I mean, you have to be authentic, but to what Rob said, your values define your culture. And by God's providence, we totally redid our values over the past year and launched them this past August in peacetime. And now it's been amazing to look back and see that was, I'm a person of faith, so I'm using faith language, but to see that was really orchestrated by the Lord for this wartime that we're in. So I 18 years ago, I came up with a list of values, and over the past 4 or 5 years, they lost a little bit of their, the relevancy. Words change over time. They weren't as distinctive. They weren't as descriptive as I once meant them to be. I saw other companies that didn't live them out using
the distribution and growth of the distributed workforce.
Say that again, Charlie.
Did they lose that impact or their meaning because of the growth of the distributed workforce?
No, integrity was one. That's great. It should just be table stakes. What does that mean? When Enron uses the word integrity, it doesn't mean as much. It did when leadership, not as descriptive enough. Results sounds great. We're a bit, so they were good. I could defend them if you give me 20 minutes, but we had 1,000 team members nationwide, and I want our values to be so known and so distinctive and descriptive that anybody, team members I haven't even met that live all over the country, that they know what our culture is. So we shifted. As I researched what would our new values be, I stumbled across an ancient word that I loved. And I said, we're not just going to redo our values. We're going to redo what we call them, and we're going to call them virtues. And the idea of a virtue is something that to us is more aspirational, and it's also more actionable. It's something that brings out the best of me. And at the same time, I can do something every single day. There's an actions I can take. I can feel like I'm making progress. Mm-hmm. So here's my wristband. But we launched a campaign around it, and it's been a year coming up with them and how we launched it. But gratitude, wisdom, care, courage, grit, and celebration. And they're specifically in an order, which we call the virtuous cycle. And I use them in many ways, almost like the order of my prayer in the morning. I mean, so this morning as I'm waking up and driving to my workout, Lord, thank you. I'm just grateful for your gift of a new day. And then I pray for wisdom. I pray that take the wisdom and interact with people in a caring way. But,
how does it, but
I would go through them. I go through them in order.
I hear that, but be more specific. How are you applying those? Those were great when you announced them a year ago.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, first they looked at you like probably with a cocked head, like, what did this come from, right? Virtues. But now you've sort of implemented that. Everybody's on board. I know they are. And, but now I'm worried about my job. I don't have any, I'm not generating any revenue. I don't anybody have any to call on, How are you applying this now? How does it impact? How do you hold on to it? Like you say, have grit, it's like, oh, come on, Chris, man.
Yep. Well, they've never been more appropriate and applicable. Okay. We are, every talk I give, I'm talking about them. We've been doing now a live weekly State of the Nation We used to do it once a year address, and now Stephen, my president, and I are doing a weekly live for about 45 minutes and then 20, 30 minutes of questions. And we also have stories called Virtues Observed. Anybody that's seen a team member observing a virtue, and the level of depth of these virtues, it was breadth, but the level of depth in a season of struggle, not just a season of success. Let me tell you how I've seen care. Let me tell you how I've seen courage. So our
Tell
team
me this
members
then.
are
Tell me the other
celebrating-
side of this. Tell me, as an employee, what am I hearing and why do I care?
Yeah. You care if you just started, you care because this will make you a better person. Whether you're with our organization for 6 months or 50 years, you are a better person if you apply these character lessons, in a sense, these virtues to your life. We don't want team members that don't have a growth mindset and don't want to become a better person.
Okay.
So my responsibility as a Christian business owner that I feel called to, my mission in a sense and purpose is, how do I use the business as a platform to impact people's personal lives? So the greatest way I can do that is remind them of character traits, in a sense, virtues that are better for them, whether it's personally or professionally applied. Grit will make you a better person. So let me show you examples of it, talk about it.
We're running short of time, and I want to, and I'm sorry that we did this, but always leave them wanting. That's sort of the thing we wanted. But what do you recommend to CEOs who have primarily, I'm talking these entrepreneurs that we're dealing with, and many on this call have centralized organizations. What do you recommend in moving this culture from centralized to decentralized? Because you did do that.
Yep.
Okay. What do you recommend?
Well, simple, but I think we often forget it. I've never heard an employee of mine say you're over communicating. I mean, I try to stand, be seen, be heard, and listen as often as I can, especially in seasons of crisis, until people say it's too much. And no one's ever said that's too much. So I literally have a list I got from my assistant yesterday, the cell phone number of every frontline employee. I began yesterday. I called 15 of them. We have 1,000 team members nationwide. A few of them are furloughed right now. I'm over the next 2 weeks, I will call every employee and thank them, express gratitude. How you doing? I mean, I'm using this as an opportunity to shrink the organization, not in a financial way, though that might happen, but in a personal relational way. So over communicate. My top job is in building culture is communicating, and not just talking, but listening as well. And these seasons of crisis, our ears and our hearts are a little more open than ever before. So leaning on one another, speaking to topics of the moment, whether it be COVID or race, economics, but assuring them that we're better together.
I'm pretty amazed. I mean, calling every single employee, because they say, but again, as a centralized, if you look back at Rob with Sales Loft, everybody was right there, right? And now all of a sudden, it's you and 20 people as opposed to 250 people, right? Kind of a thing. And you go like, wow, what do I do now? Staying in touch the way you're doing it, that's just incredible. You can't over communicate. I love that. I've never heard an employee tell me I've over communicated.
I'll say the same thing 10 times and I think I'm clear. And then next week someone will say, they'll ask a question about it. And I thought, have you heard this? And no, it's just, we have to say it over and over and over in a compelling way, in a different way, through stories and examples. And that's, you do that enough, culture gets really strong.
We got like 2 minutes left. Okay. And I've taken up everybody's time by asking my questions. Does anybody have sort of a question that they wanted to
real quickly? It was asked if Rob, maybe you could post some of your books and podcasts. Maybe you could give that to Charlie. He could post on his website.
Yeah, I'm glad to.
And the second thing, Jamie Davies introduced an interesting concept. Leaders must understand the psychology of how remote teams work. And I don't know if you wanted to maybe explore some of the psychology of that for the last couple of minutes.
I'm going to cut that one off. I want to cut that one off just a little bit. And here's why is next week, I want to talk about the topic being is how do you manage remote sales forces? Or not for sales, I said Salesforce, remote and employee workforce. Okay. So just with that in mind, but go ahead, Rob, just finish this up.
I mean, I think it's bigger than a 1 minute answer. I think it's realizing that the environment, the change of environment does impact our people. and looking for ways to account for that, being transparent about it. We use a system called Amplify for getting feedback from our people. And so once I heard from a friend that they measured their employee workforce productivity, and they saw during this COVID distributed that it was up 24%. And that intensity of staring at the screen and no distractions, which creates a heavy like focal tunnel, it actually weighs on them. So we actually did every other Saturday off, or you get Saturdays off, every other Friday off through the summer. So seven Fridays off, because it was we saw we were scoring low on a rest score. And so, I mean, I would say, put some systems in place so you can measure it and then act on it. And the biggest thing people want to know is if you care and you're actually going to do something with the information. And the good news is, I think the reason Charlie was rattling my head of what's in it for them, some of this culture and value stuff. Well, it's because the alternatives are so terrible. The bar is so low in so many other companies that they just show up and they do their job and nobody cares. They don't get to bring their whole personhood to work. That when we actually care about them as a whole person, then they get to live a more integrated life, which is inherently beneficial.
Hey, Charlie, I want to just say thanks to Chris for not acting like something doesn't exist. And that's what leaders do. And in building culture, we must listen deeply. And as we go through these times, we must listen deeply and also embrace a culture that's inclusive of young and old, different minorities, everybody. Because if you had an old me in your company, I would have told you that people complain about remote workforces all the time. Being remote is not new. And so we just need to see that this is just more people being remote, a lot of people who love working remotely, and then there are those who want to come back to the workplace. But I want to thank both of you for your leadership, and I hang in with this group, even though it does not look like me, because we are praying people, and you give me hope, and that's where I get my hope from this group, not the way it looks, because I keep praying for more diversity and inclusiveness in this group, but there's a lot, I learned a lot from being a part of this group. So I want to say thank you, and just keep listening deeply to your teams, to your customers, to everybody. And that's how we're going to make this a better place.
Thank you.
Yvonne, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being in my life for these couple of decades that we've been through, because I've learned so much from you. And
I'm not good right now, just to let you know that I'm not good.
Ben, I believe it. I'm sorry. But let me, I do thank, as Yvonne did, I thank Chris and I thank Rob. Rob, I know you came back from your vacation here for this time, so thank you so much for stepping in and helping our community. And
Yeah.
Chris, you're just always a star, and I think we all need to be praying for you and what you're going through with your business there, which is sort of, it's catastrophic to have to dig out of where you are right now to have a market just evaporate. So we'll be praying.
Right, and school's open again. America needs that as much as we do.
We'll do that.
Especially those that are homeschooling kids at home. So.
All right. Well, that's your new market. It's going to have all these events for all these homeschools, because these homeschools are going to become big, right? I'm sure you're looking into that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. So just some things that I heard. One is your culture is really the foundation of your company that you build upon. It is the differentiator that cannot be matched by any other competitor. And that's why it's so important. I heard also this personal highlights, in a call with people, to have personal highlights with these remote workforce, just so that we can remind ourselves that we are people. This is a fabulous thing to do. And also what Chris is doing, calling each employee as a CEO, 1,000 employees. And then lastly, that builds on that, which is, I've never heard anybody tell me that I've over communicated. So I thank you all for all your participations, for showing up. I also give you this weekly reminder is watch your cash. It goes out fast. It comes in slow. Okay. And we're going to get through this. You will get through this. Chris, you will get through this. So learn fast, decide fast, and go faster. If you have any issues that are facing you, and I see some of them that you've mentioned in the chat, I'm going to take those to heart. But if you have some others that are not in the chat, email me. If you're dealing with them, other CEO founders are dealing with them too, and we'll make that one of the future discussion items here. So come in early. I started 15 minutes early. We could all start talking together and just catch up with each other because we are, in fact, people, and together we are stronger. I'm praying for you, and I thank you for your time. Chris, Rob, thank you. Have a
Thank you,
good day,
Charlie.
guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Charlie.
Strong and courageous.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.